good evening and welcome everyone. This is week 12 of our conversations on community resilience in changing times. I'm Catherine Jordan, and this week our topic is on dismantling conquest. I suddenly forgot what I was talking about then. So a big welcome to Sandra and Kathy, who are going to be part of this conversation this evening. Really big welcome to you both.
Hello.
Hi. Hi. Hello,
Thank
Sandra.
you, Catherine. Thank you. Lovely to be with you.
Great, thank you. So we're going to start this conversation a little bit differently this week. We're aware this is a kind of somewhat abstract / difficult topic, and we just want to start the conversation today with a little bit of resourcing, a little bit of grounding and connecting before we begin. So wherever you may be and where you're listening to this, just invite you to close your eyes for a minute, and we're all going to do this together. So just connecting to something grounding before we start. So just being aware of your breath, just noticing where you are right now in yourself as you join us on this conversation today. Just see if you can notice how you're already doing right now. What's present for you? And just see if you can welcome yourself more fully, just acknowledging how you're experiencing your reality right now. What are you feeling? What are you thinking? And just see if you can welcome each thing that you notice. Maybe just saying in your mind, welcome, welcome. And being aware of just being in the space that you're sat in right now, feeling how your body is sat, feeling where your bottom's in contact with the ground or with the cushion. And see if you can really bring your attention to the edge of your skin, place where your skin meets your clothes, where your clothes meet the chair. To see if you can really feel that part of your body. And then maybe see if you can take your breath to that point of contact. Maybe imagining that you're breathing in and out of that place of contact. And just seeing if you can really sense the support and the holding of the cushion or the chair, whatever it is that's underneath you. Just see if you can really receive that support. Often we very unconsciously sit down on objects and don't really acknowledge the holding and the support we receive from the furniture. So maybe just taking a moment to feel that if you can. And let's just do the same with our feet. However our feet are in contact with the ground. Just really feeling the soles of your feet, or whatever part of your feet or your legs are in contact with the ground. Really feeling the quality, if you can, of the soles of your feet as they sit in your socks or your shoes, and then how they connect with the ground beneath you, and how that ground connects with the ground beneath that. And again, just connecting the breath, your breath, with that place of contact in the soles of your feet, where we come into contact with the ground. Just let your breath rest there. And then just taking some big deep breaths into your belly, just maybe 3 big deep breaths, breathing in right down into your belly. And then breathing out. In again. And one more. And just opening your eyes when you feel ready. So just nice to start the conversation from a bit of support. So welcome SHODO, who's just joined us. You're muted at the moment, just to, don't know if you can unmute yourself just to bring you into the conversation.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome.
Happy to be here, and I had a time zone mistake.
Okay, that's the difficulty with being across time zones, but I'm really grateful you managed to work it out and you're with us. Okay, great. So I'm just going to read a little something to introduce the topic this evening, and then I will introduce our speakers a bit more, tell you a bit more about them. So, Dismantling Conquest. Today we're going to be gently guiding you into one of the most important conversations needed for our times. For some of you, the title of the conversation may itself be a bit baffling. You may be wondering, what is Dismantling Conquest? And why is it part of a community resilience series? Not long ago, I probably would have thought exactly the same. Most of us listening to this conversation will have some sense of familiarity with the reality of what white man has done to Indigenous people around the world. Many of us also probably feel we have learned from this, and that this ideology that created that has ceased. I know this is what I thought was true. Unfortunately, this is far from the case. In reality, it has just changed its expression in the world and has become more embedded in our psychology, in our language and way of thinking, and less from our conscious mind. We don't notice how hardwired conquest mentality is in the Western world, and how it's a foundational root to many of the problems we are facing today. So I wanted to read a little excerpt from a book from Sherry Mitchell on this topic. She is a Indigenous woman who is an Indigenous rights activist and spiritual teacher. And this is a reading from her book called Sacred Instructions, Indigenous Wisdom for Living Spirit-Based Change. And she says, for more than 17 centuries, world leaders have been operating under the principle of conquest and genocide that were outlined in the 4th century under the just war theory. Throughout history, these acts have not only been promoted as just and noble, they have been cited by religious leaders as obligations to God. Under these archaic laws and ideologies that shape them, we've come to believe that conquest is the natural order of things. We find it in nearly every aspect of our lives today. We must conquer our demons, our bodies, and our enemies alike. We have a war on terrorism, a war on drugs, and a war on poverty. We battle depression, anxiety, and our fat. We even battle for peace. This ideology has become so deeply embedded in the public psyche that it is now part of our common language. Even in the work that we're doing to help shift towards a world of peace, we engage with the language of conquest by seeking to topple, overthrow, and tear down our opponents. We have been indoctrinated so completely that even imagining another way of being is viewed as naive or crazy. This is simply a story that has been created. We can change this story. If we hope to write a new story, we must first change our minds about the nature of the divine and about our individual and collective power. I wanted to also bring into this conversation today how we unconsciously play this relationship out with the earth. On the whole, we have lost the fundamental conversation and relationship with the earth, of which we are a part. We treat the earth as something to be conquered and exploited, and as such are on a trajectory of destroying the very thing that sustains our lives. We also play out this relationship with our animal kingdom, seeing ourselves as top of the food chain, another ideology that we have come to accept as true, which allows us to play out the most inhumane acts on our animal relatives. In this conversation today, we hope to bring these aspects of ourselves more into conscious awareness, not to induce shame or guilt, but to give us the opportunity to know that we are unconsciously being part of this, and to give us the opportunity to be part of birthing a new way of being, where we can live in harmony with the world in which we are a part. For those of us on this conversation today, we appreciate this can be a difficult reality to come into awareness of. And so we will aim to go gently in this conversation today. To be more accommodating of the process, we have formatted this conversation slightly differently. We will be offering this conversation in 2 parts. This week, we'll be inviting you to come to know this ideology in yourself, and we will be sharing our experiences of how we've come to understand this in our own lives. We will then invite you to take the next 4 weeks exploring how this comes up in your thinking, your language, and your actions in your daily life. We will also be offering a supportive session next week titled Trauma Recovery to help with settling the trauma in our systems so we can absorb these realities and find our natural state of resilience and adaptability in the face of them. Then on the 4th of May, we'll be holding part 2 of this conversation, exploring how we can practically dismantle these ideologies to bring opportunity for a new way of being and to give us a chance of a more sustainably and deeply collaborative future. I'm really delighted to have 3 wise women on this to guide us on this conversation today, who've really come to understand this in themselves and have a vast amount of wisdom to share on this topic. So big welcome to the 3 of you.
Hi.
Hey. Okay, so I'm just going to introduce you all 3 of you with a bit more information about you. So firstly, Sandra White. Welcome, Sandra.
I'm so glad to be here, Catherine. Thanks for hosting this. It's really important. Thank you.
Thank you. It is important, and thank you for making me more aware of that as well as we've talked about it. Sandra is a psychologist, an eco-psychologist, and now a sustainability consultant. She is the daughter of a Holocaust survivor which led her on a path to understanding the factors underlying the worst of how human beings treat each other and the natural world. Very delighted to hear more about that. Thank you. And we also have SHODO Spring with us. Hi, SHODO.
Hi, I loved your introduction.
Thank you. I'm glad it took me a while to settle on what to read, but I'm glad you like it. Thank you. So SHODO is an ordained Zen priest and teacher. She is the founder of Mountain and Waters Alliance and the leader of 2013 Compassionate Earth Walks along the North how do you pronounce that? KXL route. Okay, the Northern KXL route. Thank you.
People in North America know what it is.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. That's absolutely fine. I have heard of it, but yeah, just it wasn't in my my common language. She's creating a book about consciousness and climate change, which I'm hoping we'll hear a bit more about in the conversation. Thanks, SHODO. Nice to have you with us.
Happy to be here.
Great. And we have Kathy Hilton. Again, Kathy's with us because she has so much wonderfulness to offer to these conversations. So she's joining us again. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Great. So Kathy is an artisan of cultural regeneration, facilitating societal change through awareness. So really glad to have you on this conversation with us again.
Pleasure.
And we've got David back this week. David's been away for a couple of weeks doing a bit of background research on resilience, but he's going to hopefully pop in and tell us what he'll be doing as part of the team today. David, are you with us?
I certainly am. Hello, everybody. So I'm David, and my job is to liaise between the event as you guys are creating it live on Zoom, and as this is happening a few seconds later on Facebook Live. So you will see, if you're watching it in real time, that there's a chat box or comments box, I think it's called, and we would love it if you made use of that. So what you could do is put in comments, questions, appreciations, and then from time to time, I will pop in and relay them to Catherine and Murray bunch of panelists, or if I might just copy and paste them to Catherine. But either way, it's a way of including you in the event. So rather than it being this thing where we've got this panel of experts and you, the passive audience, you're part of a pop-up live community where wherever you are in the world, we're creating some magic and some healing. So do get your fingers going, and if you've got anything that you think is worth saying, don't think, oh no, I couldn't possibly put that in. Just be brave. We'd love to hear from you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. Okay, so over to you ladies now. So just would like to hear a bit more about you really, and why you felt inspired to say yes to speaking on this topic. So maybe Sandra, I can start with you first, if that's okay. I'd love to hear a bit more from you.
Yeah, thank you, Catherine. So I'll say a tiny bit more about what you introduced about my background, and that is that I am the daughter of a Jewish Holocaust survivor. My mother was nearly killed by the Nazis on Kristallnacht when she was 3 years old. And although she has no conscious memory of that, it's very much live in the family story, and it's very much a foundation of how she sees herself and her life. And as I, came to study it and look into it, one of the things that really impacted me the most was that this was a phenomenon about how ordinary people treated their neighbors and their friends. They were a community of neighbors and friends until yesterday. And there was, in my view, a set of conditions which called out of every person who humiliated Jews in the streets or threw bricks through Jewish people's windows, or worse, or even milder than that. There was something in the conditions that called that behavior out of them. And when we look at other genocides all the way around the world, between different races, similar races, people who've lived deeply in community for generations, suddenly this changes into this terrible, terrible dehumanizing behavior and this murderous behavior. And that really taught me that these potentials are in all of us. And therefore, I've been on a lifelong journey, really, to try and understand what wakes them up and what can calm them down. And that's really what I'm doing here, is trying to think aloud about what it is that I understand about this phenomena, you know, with all of you. That's probably enough for now, I should think.
Yeah, thank you. I think it was a modest introduction to what I've come to understand of your depth of wisdom on this topic so far. So it was a very modest introduction, but thank you, Sandra. Thank you. SHODO, would you like to say a bit more about where you're coming from in this conversation?
It's challenging. What I know is that I grew up with a set of ideas about who people were and about owning the land and certain religious ideas. I came to learn that the things I was taught were not true. And increasingly over the decades, so I became aware of genocide against Native American people, for one thing. I learned about the doctrine of discovery, which says, well, first you have to be Christian to own land, but then you don't even count if you're not exploiting it, paving it, logging it, mining it. You know, if you're not destroying it, you're nothing, you're nobody, you're worthless. And this is so deeply horrendous. It's like, how could people ever come to such a thought, such a value? And I've started looking into trauma in Europe because we're the ones who created the trauma in the rest of the world, basically. I'm not saying we have exclusivity on that, but most of the things I know about were done by Europeans. And of course, being of German ancestry, I'm particularly aware of it. And so that mystery, how can people be that way? How can they be that way collectively? And so the term conquest is, of course, very alive. I've studied it in myself. I think so. It's called owning. So I take care of 17 acres of really beautiful land, and doing a little bit of farming on a little bit of that land. And so I've noticed weeds, invasive plants, things like that. We call them weeds, which I don't know how many other languages don't have that word. I know the Dakota language doesn't have it. And so I constantly see the mind of war in myself. I see conquest. It's like you have to get rid of the buckthorn, have to get rid of the reed canary grass, have to get rid of, have to. And it was a young Native man who was working with me around the orchard who said to me, those plants are really strong over here. And then he said, they talk to each other, you know. And I was like, oh, so it's not only the mind of war and conquest and killing, it's also a fruitless endeavor because they're conscious too. And I have to find a way to learn to live with them. And so on a personal level, I'm making an effort to learn to live with. And at the same time, I'm trying to teach other people that we need to learn to live with. And of course, this leads me into connections with whole cultures and whole societies of people who did know how to live with, who left things better. But the Menominee are an example of who's still doing it, and the Anishinaabe are doing it, and the Dakota and the Lakota, and those are just the people near me. You know, the tribes that have a connection with their ancestors and a connection with their land are in this modern day protecting and regenerating and reviving. And I'm here, I'm getting to watch them, and sometimes I get to support them. And so it's an exciting time to be alive. And this word conquest is relevant. So thanks for starting this conversation.
Thank you so much. There's just so much depth already in this dialogue, just from what the two of you just said there. Thank you so much. Kathy, would you like to say why you've decided to brave joining us for a third time?
Yes, yes, I know. Well, I'm just going to go with being honest here, which is to say I start off by feeling inadequate and lots of imposter syndrome around I don't have enough to bring. I don't have as much as these more qualified people to bring. But what I do bring is, so up until 2 years ago, I was a designer. I was living a very mainstream life, but people who know me would disagree. But I was living a life very much within the consumer culture of our world. And I personally had a crisis and thought, I'm part of the problem. I'm part of my business. My business is ecologically destructive. And I have to stop this. I have to stop my business. Since then, I've been inquiring into why have we as a society failed to meet the ecological crisis. You know, we've been talking for decades about what problems we have, what a crisis we're in, and not meeting the challenges. So I have a real fascination for psychology and anthropology. So I just started looking at why are we failing? And that's why I'm here. I'm here because I'm passionate about normal people, not specialists in the field, not experts, living in ways that meet the ecological crisis and meet the societal crisis, because it's the same thing. We can all, I'm sure, agree that we have become a very unhealthy society. The British culture and all cultures, nearly all cultures, are extraordinarily unhealthy these days, and it's all linked. And it's all too easy to imagine other people should sort that out. Governments should sort it out. Everybody's got their people that they blame. And I'm here to really ground, with the intention of really grounding all of these experiences into normal people's lives, and how we mainstream people can start being responsible for meeting the crisis and changing the world so that we are creating really healthy cultures, really healthy society, and we're in good partnership with our ecosystems.
Right. I'm really glad you named what you named at the beginning, because I can relate to what you said, and very much so. Actually, fortunately, in my position, I don't have to feel qualified. I just have to be willing to hold the conversations. So I feel very similar to you, Kathy. Like, I definitely don't feel qualified on this topic at all, but I feel very willing to understand it more in myself and to explore it and to have these conversations. And I think that's all, as we talked about when we talked about it, is that's what's really important, is just being willing to have these conversations and to connect with the wider community around these topics, which is really important and valuable. So thank you. So Kathy, I'll stay with you if that's all right, and I'll ask you a bit more of a personal question. Just getting to understand where you're coming from this a bit more. So you sent me an interesting email when we were talking about the session and planning it. And I just wondered if you could share a bit more about it. I was really interested in what you wrote, and I wonder if you would mind sharing with us a bit more about your perspective on that.
I can, and I'm conscious that some of my points have already been addressed, so I'm rethinking quite what to say. So I'm going to speak on the fly, if you will bear with me. So I was attracted to the subject, and to be honest, it took me 45 minutes of a Zoom with you guys to even understand what I meant by conquest, what we meant by conquest, why we're having the conversation at all. And I think I'll just introduce my thoughts at this point and say more about it all further along in the conversation. But certainly I take conquest to be a quality within each of us. It's a quality within us. Conquest is a quality within us. And our culture, Western culture, has basically very few of us think about it. Very few of us think about conquest as an aspect of our nature. And if we do think about it objectively, we very likely think of it positively. It's very linked with aspiration, with achievement, with success. The cultural conversation is basically positive, or it's remote, like it's warfare, like it's genocide. So it's either remote and dangerous, or it's an aspect of ourselves that is achievement based and positive. I do think, though, that as we accommodate and nurture conquest within ourselves, that simple act eclipses a presence of non-fight within us. Conquest is intrinsically linked with fight, and if you're fighting, you can't harmonize. We think that the opposite of conquest, we think that the opposite of winning is losing. But what about if the opposite of winning was working in partnership with nature, working in partnership with all of our communities? I think in that is the health that we're all looking for, both the physical health, the mental health, the eco health, societal health. I think conquest is actually a cornerstone of our fundamental issues as society. And if we were to dismantle it, which this conversation is part of, we can dismantle it through awareness. And if we were to do that, we would begin the collapsing of the structures that hold together the mess we are in. So that's why I'm here. That's what we're here to do. Let's do it.
Yeah, great, thank you. Well, I mean, there's lots of things you said there that were just fantastic, and I thought, she questioned, she's qualified on this topic.
I'm weird. I was drawing pictures until 2 years ago.
But I think just by being human, we're qualified on this topic. I really do. But the thing that really stood out to me that I really appreciate that you named is about how we see conquest as in the positive elements of it. Like, you know, we are very indoctrinated into winning, achieving, succeeding, being goal orientated, and they're things we see as positive. They build our sense of self-esteem and you know, feeling good, just those basic kind of human needs that we have. We've very much attached into those things. So yes, it's not, and it's just healthy to acknowledge, I think, that aspect of it as well, that it's something that we see in that way. So thank you for naming that, Kathy. I really appreciate that. Okay, so I'll move on to Sandra's question, if that's all right, Sandra. So Sandra, from what I understand of your approach on this topic, your understanding around this really comes from understanding the psychology of conquest, I wonder if you would mind telling us a bit more about that.
Yeah, thank you. So there's something that I'd like to do that is about responding to both what SHODO brought, particularly in your description, SHODO, of learning to live with plants that we have labeled weeds. And Kathy, what you just talked about in terms of what if the opposite of winning was not losing, but in a way living with, that would be another way of thinking about it. And I think it's fair to say that I do bring a slightly different task from becoming aware of these dynamics within ourselves. We can't do this dismantling of conquest without awareness. I'm completely in that territory as well. But I think that the way that I've had to look at this has been to try and really think about what are the origins of our need to conquest, our need to conquer. And I've been in a very long journey that is about examining myself, but also observing, very close observation of certain behaviors in society. And I've come to think about our drive to conquer as meeting some fundamental psychological needs. And so I really need to ask for forgiveness in what I'm about to say, but I do think that awareness actually may very well not be enough, because I think that there are some very valid needs that are being met through the drive to conquer. And so I'm just going to take a few minutes to try and bring out how I see that. And it's brought me to think about us human beings as a social creature. And what is it, you know, particularly in the West, we think about ourselves, and our whole story about ourselves is that we are individuals. And so that's where that proposition that winning and conquering is so positive, because that's in service to the individual getting what we need. And we've constructed this either or set of ideas that I can only get what I need if others, you know, by conquering others. But actually, what's at the heart of being a social creature? It seems to me that at the heart of being a social creature is a sense of what I'm going to call goodness. Now, I'm going to give you a warning. There are 3 words I'm going to use. All of them need much more unpacking than we've got time for today. But I hope that I'll be able to communicate something of the essence of them. So the first one is that we need to know ourselves as social creatures as having some essential goodness at the core of us. When we are social, we want to be of service to the whole. We don't only want to be of service to ourselves. For me, that's a really core idea in being a social creature, a social species. So I'm going to invite you to think about a triangle, and at the bottom of the triangle is that concept of ourselves as good. And then there are the 2 sides of the triangle that reach to different corners. I think when we think about ourselves, we also need to see ourselves as and know ourselves as valid. That each of our individual lives is valid. So the needs that we have as a specimen of the human species are valid. And so for me, this has been the most critical insight of what I've learned when I think about what happened to how the Nazis began to see Jews. Because what happened in that period of history is that within German people's eyes, Jews lost their validity. And those of us who have looked into this, it's been recorded so many times that the Jews began to be described in language that was subhuman. And most often they began to be described as vermin. And that is a way of stealing away the validity of what it means to be human. So I'm not even talking about dignity. I'm really talking about that core quality of my life is valid. I'm entitled to it. I'm entitled to breathe. I'm entitled to fulfill myself. I'm entitled to desire even to fulfill myself. I'm entitled to desire to live a good and healthy life and to contribute to the whole. So there's something very important about that. What would drive somebody to need to steal the validity of the other and take it to oneself? And and this is the more complicated word, the other side of the triangle is that I think we also need to know ourselves to feel that we're valid. There's a level of our consciousness that needs to know ourselves as innocent. And I mean that in a very particular way. And I'm drawing from the psychodynamic theories of psychology, so Freud and Jung, which Freud in particular focused on the origins of personality being shaped in our very young experience as babies. So that's one of my foundation stones. So if I think about innocence, I'm really talking about we are innocent, are valid, particularly when we're very young. And if we think about how our personalities get shaped, they get shaped by the interaction of our innate character with our environment. And so there's a level at which if our needs, our valid needs don't get met, how our personality then gets shaped in response to that, very young, there's a level at which we're also innocent of our response to that. We're doing our best to respond as well as we possibly can to the adversity that we're experiencing. And it seems to me that our core self-esteem, which is what enables us to function as healthy, strong, contributing members of our communities and our families and indeed our species, is rooted in having a core sense of ourselves as good, valid, and innocent. And if we can't experience ourselves as that, I think what is produced in us is a very core experience of ourselves as shameful. And I want to draw a distinction between shame and guilt. Shame is about who we are, guilt is about what we do. And if we feel that we have not been able to get our needs met, this is a very classical way of thinking about human development. If when we're very young, we haven't had a chance to get our needs met, our valid needs, of which we're innocent, because we're simply a creature, then I think what's created in the core sense of ourselves is an incredibly deep hole that is full of shame. And then that produces a set of behaviors that's about trying to fill that unfillable hole. And part of that is taking to ourselves everything good in the world. And part of that, therefore, becomes stealing the validity of everything else, because my hole that I'm struggling to fill to prove to myself that I'm valid is so deep. And there's a level at which if I can't experience myself as valid, I can't experience others as valid. And I can't want their needs to be met either. And somehow that it creates a kind of twin drive to prove my validity by stealing others' validity to fill my hole. And also at the same time, there's this sort of compensatory drive to kind of keep proving I'm innocent. But because I'm poorly resourced, I can only do it in the same way of trying to take everything good to myself. So that's one way I have of understanding why it's not as simple, I think, as saying I need to become aware of the ways in which I want to conquer. I think there are other things that we also need to do, which is about resourcing ourselves, expanding our sense of ourselves, and coming to know ourselves as good, innocent, and valid, so that we then aren't needing to compensate for anything. So then we're not still needing to kind of fill up something inside ourselves that is so deep and so needy. So for me, the first project is to expand our sense of goodness, innocence, and validity, resource ourselves, really, in a way, train ourselves to know that we are born with those qualities. They are our birthright. And then we can relax. We don't have to prove anything. We don't have to prove anything by grabbing to ourselves what doesn't belong to us, including others' lives, including others' well-being, including even other species' lives and well-being. We can then have a better chance of living in harmony with everything that there is. I've took longer than I planned, but I hope that that was coherent and offered something.
More than coherent. I feel like I just did an absolute masterclass. that was really, really amazing, Sandra. Thank you so much for sharing that. Wow, I'm in complete awe of what you just said.
Let's put Sandra in charge of the world.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
So that thank you, Kathy. Let me just say then the project. So I've obviously talked about it as an individual, and I've struggled with all of these things in my own life. But the project actually then becomes, how do we translate a set of understandings like that, a set of propositions like that, into a collective setting? And that's very much what I'm preoccupied with. And there's something, the last thing I'll say is that what I do want to participate in is that if I do understand that when I meet people who I find very challenging because they're involved in a mindset of conquest, the task I've set myself, and so this has really required me to expand myself, has been to share in the project of upholding actively my and their sense of being good, valid, and innocent. Really seeing that as a shared project, and really affirm that in powerful, active ways, to know that I am and equally they are. I mean, there was a book, I'm okay, you're okay. It's sort of in that territory, but really actively upholding that quality of innocence, particularly, is the most controversial one. And then there can be, I think, that relaxing. And then how do we multiply that up onto a collective setting? And a little later, I may be able to offer an example, an imperfect example, but it'll show how I was thinking about that. Anyway, I'm really shutting up now. Thank you.
No, it's great. Thank you so much. Yeah, so rich. And I'm really hoping maybe in part 2, Sandra, we can explore a bit more of how we can fill up that cup of those needs. Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Wow, amazing. Okay.
That is the great question, how?
Yeah, it is, isn't it? I think the part that the awareness side of it is knowing that in ourselves, knowing that I have a lack in terms of validity, innocence, and then knowing those things, I think is the first part, isn't it? But then there is the, how do I replenish that for myself, and how do I meet that for myself? So,
Well, yeah, because you can know them intellectually, and yet in your body where trauma is held and in the structures of your brain, it's like you just can't get there. So you're not experiencing the world that way. And what we need is to experience the world in that way, that we're welcome. That you said valid, somebody else says worthy. And what was it? Oh, good. Anyway, different set of words, but yeah, to experience life as it really is, instead of experiencing life through the lens of trauma.
Absolutely. Yeah, great. Well, I'm looking forward to exploring that more in part 2 of the conversation, because I think it's really good to kind of, I think what you just offered, Sandra, is a kind of enlightenment in itself, just to kind of think, oh yeah, okay, this is really fundamental. It really resonates for me, and I think it's definitely resonating for those of us here on the conversation. So maybe with a bit more time to let that settle, we can then speak to that in the part 2. Thank you. So SHODO, I'll move on to your question. So in our conversation recently, I asked you how you were challenging conquest in your life, and you said to me, I'm just living it. I'm just living it. I just wonder if you can tell us, but I found your answer to this question really inspiring. So I wonder if you would mind sharing that with us on the call today.
Okay, if I forget something, because I'm just going to start off, so you can remind me if I forget something. So I already mentioned about the practice of how I interact with plants and animals. And so I allow myself some space. I'm aware of a great purity in certain movements, for instance, veganism, that is all about what we shouldn't do, it seems to me, and about valuing other lives. And I'm aware that other animals eat each other. And I'm aware that when I became very strict with my diet, two things happened. One of them was that I got physically ill. So my ideas of what I should eat did not match what my body wanted me to eat. And the other was that I liked being pure. I liked being perfect. And it gave me a platform from which to look down on other people and to launch aggressions at them about what they should be doing. And it was my physical health that didn't allow me to continue to do that. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm not grateful that my health isn't perfect, but I'm grateful that I've had to find another stance. And the stance, well, one piece of my stance is I don't know what you should eat. But another piece of my stance is you can love things and you may still have to hurt them. And every time I dig something up out of the ground. And so some of the practice of that is asking permission. So someone visited the farm last fall and did some work. We were pulling things up and moving things around. And he was a Zen person, and he invented a verse. So in Zen, there are all these little verses that you say when you're going to do something. And the verse that he invented for weeding, which was painful. I mean, weeding is painful if you're connected at all. It's like, oh my gosh, it's going to be dead. This verse says, together with all beings, I open the ground for new life. And there were a couple of other verses. And then later I invented one that was, together with all beings, may you return to your true home. And that was buckthorn was brought here from Europe to make hedges, and it liked it here. It expanded in the same way the European humans have expanded. Let's make more, let's make more, let's make more, let's make more, let's, and then, damage things so nobody else can survive. And so when there's a really pretty buckthorn tree that I really need to cut down because it will make thousands of itself. It has berries. And it's so painful that I have not managed to do it yet, even while I was digging up other buckthorns. And so in order to make that change, which the community of life needs, the community of life does not want to be all buckthorns, and it doesn't want to be all humans. And so to make that change, I'm going to have to harm this one individual. And so I'm going to have to find within myself how to do that. So when people come and visit and do work on the land, I say, ask permission. And sometimes I remind them, but I'm so bad at it myself. It's like I've been raised, I certainly have at least 50 years of being taught that I was the owner and master of all of this stuff, even though I was a woman. Yeah. So therefore I was not the owner or master of anything, but still I could own land, I could. And so I have 20 years of trying to undo that and trying to recognize that. So a Buddhist practice is really helpful to me. And so the teachings and what's been said already, we are We're not different. We're not the owners. We're not the masters. We're just another conscious being. And go ahead, find something for me that's not a conscious being. I dare you. Of course, a lot of people think that that's like not connected with science. And I was never a biologist. I was only a physicist. But so the fundamental bits of matter seem kind of alive to me. You know, they have a reality for me that maybe isn't true for everybody. And yet, when I talk about this stuff, I find that it's true for a lot of people. I'm amazed how many people say yes when I say things like, well, we have to ask for help from the forests and the oceans and the rivers and the soils and the rocks and the microbes and the buckthorn. You know, we have to ask for help. We have to come in a way that we're not the top anymore. And, you know, there's an interesting training going on. It's mostly in pipeline struggles. Standing Rock is the one that I started with, where whatever pipeline company that was, TransCanada, I think, thought that it was their right to put a pipeline to bring tar sands oil through anywhere they wanted to. They moved the pipeline so it wouldn't endanger the water of a city, and instead it would endanger the water of the tribes. They made people move. They, you know, they did whatever they wanted to. And so there was this beautiful encampment, and the instructions for non-natives were pay attention, take leadership, and help other non-natives to be appropriate too. Like, don't take pictures without permission. So I actually literally follow instructions. I was raised that way. I will say every person I said about that picture you're taking, they already had permission. But learning to follow somebody that I was not raised to follow is being incredible. And now it's like one of the major pipeline battles is in Minnesota, where I live. And people are going there, and people are getting arrested, and people are doing all kinds of beautiful things. And there's a connection with the joy of life that's part of these things. And that connection is what the Native people bring, because they know who they are. Mm. You know, we don't know who we are, you know, white. That's really exciting. So somebody was talking about a hole, and it's like, we're the people with a hole and we're trying to fill it. It's like, stop it, stop it. And I think I'll stop there.
The Buddhists have a good term for that hole, the hungry ghost.
Oh, thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Hungry ghost.
I think it's one of the most
bad part, but yeah.
Yeah, so I feel like I'm going to go slightly off script, because I guess there's a question that's really in my mind from what SHODO said about how we're all noticing this in our lives. Because I know when I came across this concept in Sherry's book, particularly noticing the language where she mentions about, you know, battle on, war on, everything, I really started to be really conscious of my language, you know, what I was telling myself, about the world around me. And I just, it's a constant day by day kind of, oh, it's there again, it's there again. I'd really love to hear from the rest of you how you're noticing this in your daily lives. I'd really love to hear more about that. Kathy?
Yeah, in preparing for this, I wrote down subject areas where I can see conquest. This isn't exactly answering your question, but I hope it's useful, because I have this list of arenas where conquest is ubiquitous. So in the business world, you know, we're so proud of winning pitches, you know, if you've pitched against other people, other companies, and you were the company chosen, we laud it. We absolutely laud it. You know, that's what we imagine to be success. So it's so deeply entrenched with us that this is a good thing. Even there's extraordinarily, women are labeled as a conquest, a sexual conquest. When a man has wanted to seduce us and thought he might not and become successful, then we're labeled a conquest. I mean, what an extraordinary piece of grammar for a person, of being a spirit, to be labeled in that way. In the sporting world, there is no sport without conquest. The sport is all about triumphing over other people who are trying to do the same thing. And how much of our attention, money, effort, spare time, passion, emotion, interest do we give to sport? That's absolutely worshipping at the feet of conquest. Human endeavor, climbing mountains. I had a Nigerian mother-in-law for some years, and she made a point which a white person wouldn't have been able to make a point. You wouldn't find a black man climbing a mountain or even building a bridge. Too big a generalization, but the concept that there are cultures who are more at peace with the status quo, and our white person culture is out there achieving to fill this hole. And obviously there are advantages to it, but also there are costs, and we have got to the point where the costs are outweighing the advantages. We talk about conquering our fears, you know, clearly a great thing. Clearly it's got to be a great thing to conquer a fear. Unless instead you approached your fear with compassion and nourishment and nurture, and then you can heal it at source, which is what Sandra expressed so beautifully. Healing things at source, rather than, if you're conquering a fear, you're like boxing it, you're suppressing it into a tiny space and operating despite it. And you have every risk of it breaking out again later on in your life, later on in the day, and continuing its damage. But if you nurture it and nourish it and heal it, then it quiets, and it's not going to get you again later in your life. I'm going to go back to answering your question more specifically. So looking at examples of conquest in my life. So when you're actually in a dispute with somebody, so most of us have come to the point where we're intelligent and compassionate enough to overcome most disputes. You know, most people that you have a falling out with or a disagreement with, you can find access to putting your ego to one side and finding a resolution. But conquest really is present in those situations where we're failing, where I'm failing. Okay, so talk about myself. I am in dispute with a friend at the moment. It's not pretty. I'm not at all comfortable with the situation. There is an element of me that is undermined by the dynamic and is trying to conquer the situation. There's also an element of me that has been wronged and hurt and feels like loved ones of mine were hurt and I'm standing up for them. You know, I've got a valid story that I'm doing the right thing to hold on to my point of view. But this concept of conquest is I can see it's present. There's the good aspect of I'm trying to do a good thing, but there's also this egoic conquesty, I'm not letting go. I want to swear, I'm not going to swear. Okay, that's my answer to the question, how is conquest playing out in my life? I would like to think that I can overcome it, but there are areas where it definitely has me. I'm in its thrall. Yeah.
It's even there again, isn't it? It's like to overcome it. So this is what I've been noticing. Yeah. Like even my language, because it's just so hardwired into our language. I'm really like amazed at that at the moment. Like even the language I use to look at how I dismantle it is the same language. Yeah, it's so in there, isn't it? You know, it's just interesting to me. Yeah, it's interesting. Thanks, Kathy. Sandra or Shodo, do you fancy adding to that? Sandra?
Okay.
So I'd just like to share two stories that have influenced me. One is, I think I'm calling it a story, but actually it was a truthful account that I heard when I was in the training that I did to become a Jungian analyst. I didn't complete that training, by the way, because I wanted to work in the collective rather than one-to-one, but I spent 6 years in that training. And in Jungian thought, it's very, very much the proposition that we don't conquer what we think of as shadow aspects of ourselves, but we learn to respect that. We learn to get to know them, first of all, and respect them and allow them into our psychic space, and then discover how to interact with them. But sort of respecting them and allowing them their validity is really critical. And I really, I've struggled in my own life to achieve that. And I heard a story that helped me to understand what that could look like. And it was a true story of a young woman who was living with schizophrenia. And the person who reported it shared her own surprise, because this young woman said to my colleague, we need to arrange to meet and talk, but I can't meet you at 4 o'clock. I can do any day I can do any time, but I can't meet you at 4 o'clock on any day. That's the time that I sit down with my voices. And so what that young woman has done, it was such a huge learning for me. That was her way of allowing in everything that she hated that she was living with, everything that terrified her that she was living with. But at 4 o'clock every day for an hour, she would sit down with her voices and go put herself through whatever they wanted to bring to her. I think that that's quite harmonious with a lot of Buddhist thinking that I've come across. And there's something about that I think is a really valuable lesson to us. And then I want to also think about, so how would we do that with conquest? Because it is equally true that, in prey-predator situations, there has to be a conqueror. For life to live and eat, the predator has to conquer the prey and eat it. It's part of what Shodo was exploring earlier as well. And so there's a level at which it's an ordinary biological drive, and it also has become a kind of pathological mindset within us, a very destructive mindset within us. So how could we sit down with our conquest drives? And actually, so I want to put something next to what you were just talking about, Kathy, when you were talking about football, say, the kinds of matches. And I agree with you. It's been the collective psychic energy. There are lessons for us in terms of how powerful football is as a game in our culture. But again, in the Jung training, one of the lectures talked about one of the ideas behind the Olympics in ancient Greece. It was the idea to allow the competitive spirit, but to allow it to be expressed through sport and through people working and dedicating themselves to being the best that they can. And, channeling all that energy into a relatively safe arena like sport. And then that's giving, it's possible that that's one way of giving conquest its space. And I must say, I like that idea. I like having safer, you know, if we're a really sporting nation and we understand that we're kind of devoting that space to this energy within us, then maybe it could reduce our desire to go off and fight wars in order to prove that we are great conquerors. I don't know that, but it seems to me a real possibility. And so I think that we could play with that idea as a collective culture. You know, I think there's value in it, because we're not going to, I think there's danger in stamping it out. I think, you know, that's really what you were exploring, Kathy. I completely agree. There's danger in trying to stamp it out.
That wasn't what I was exploring. And I was imagining that you were saying, when you talked of how conquest arises in us, that being about this well of this well that we're trying to fill. I was imagining that you were saying that we could heal that initial need, and then we wouldn't have such a conquest driven culture. And that would be my wish. That would be my wish, that when I think of some of the most beautiful people in the world, they are people who don't have this quality of lack. I need to fill myself up. They are such beautiful people, and I wish, I fear people are gonna imagine I'm naive in saying this, but my work is about making everybody complete in that way. I'm not really interested in imagining that we can't achieve that. And I may be too idealistic, but it is my intent. Yeah. Yeah, so I am surprised you're saying you're also talking of a value in having an outlet for this conquest aspect of ourselves.
Well, I think that the reality is that both exist.
Mm-hmm.
I think so. In describing the unfillable hole, I'm really describing what I think has gone wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's gone wrong too many times in too many people, so that it's part of our collective psyche, and it's part of our cultural expectations. I also have met people for whom that's not an energy, and I agree with you. I do find them extraordinarily beautiful, and I do aspire to that. But when I also think about the reality of life, so my so for my nervous system, I'm not able to, at the moment anyway, to eat a vegan diet, for example. I have been vegan for 12.5 years, but at the moment I need to eat meat, fish and eggs. And one way I think about it, I would prefer, but I don't know if I'll ever be able to do this. I would prefer to hunt my own food and kill it and eat it. That's really what I would aspire to. And I don't know if I'll achieve that in my life in terms of how I would need to move and what I'd need to learn. But that remains an aspiration for me. But accepting that at this moment in my life I can't do that, then I go to the supermarket or I go to a farmer's market. I've just joined a community supported agriculture scheme, and so I hope to get all my food through that. But it still will involve me in killing. And therefore, there's something about wanting to find a reality that this still is an ordinary drive, that it has a natural basis for it. Because for me, life feeds death and death feeds life. The two are completely intrinsic to each other if we think about the evolution of life on Earth. So there's something about how to, I suppose there's two things what I'm saying. One is that I think it is a natural drive, and whatever that word means, natural is such a difficult word in itself, but there is a real drive towards that has a benefit for life. I do believe that. But then there also is something about, perhaps I'm just talking about in my lifetime, but I don't know how I don't know how much transformation we would need to go through to completely heal the inherited trauma and the intergenerational wounding that has produced this mindset. I don't know whether that's feasible. And so if it's not feasible, then to have contained, safe channels for that energy offers a way to meet that. But there is also something important, and I don't always understand it, but there is also something important about what is Jung's proposition that is whatever is in the shadow is also entitled to its life. And without wanting to go into any detail, I just want to kind of give a headline. You know, in this quest that I've had, once I understood that these, if I call it the Nazi energy, this life denying of others energy, if I've got this proposition that it's in all of us, then I've had to look for it within myself. And I have met that energy within myself. And I have, you know, what I've come to, this is the origin really of what I was trying to bring out earlier. When I met it, what I came to see eventually was its validity. I could come to an understanding of why it was present in my own psyche, and it's present in my own psyche for valid reasons. Therefore, what right do I have to deny it its life? It needs to be contained. It needs to be made safe. It risks killing me if I don't do that. But if what I do is deny it its life, then there's a level of me that is just being the Nazi again. And that's been a very, very profound wrestling within my own life. And I think there's a really important principle that even shadow qualities need and are entitled to their life. It's a question of how do we meet them? How do we contain them? How do we create safety, even if we allow them? I'm not claiming to have the answers to that, but I think it's an incredibly important inquiry.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I really appreciate that it's been named that conquest has a place in our world, because it absolutely does. As we talk about the primitive world, there is, you know, conquest is present, and I'm really valuing this discussion actually about how we allow that to be present and have its place, but without it being dominant. So thank you. Hopefully we'll follow that up in part 2. SHODO, would you like to add something?
Yeah, I'd like to speak to Kathy's premise. I think that we have no idea what human beings could be. We have been brainwashed. We are continually brainwashed. One of the things I'm looking at for my book is how vigorously and how long and from how many sources we have been taught certain things about human beings. And then I've been finding some things that that are offering different things about what human beings are. Rutger Bregman, Humankind, Naomi Klein, Paradise Built in Hell, and a couple of other books. And some other people. And so on the one hand, we are surrounded and bombarded by the thought that what we fundamentally are is evil. You know, you can go back to the Catholic Church, but then it comes, that thought comes up again and again. We're nothing but economic. We only care about ourselves and our families. And we have been so deeply lied to that we have no idea. And so SANDRA pointing out what you need to do with the shadow is really important. I studied Aikido for a while, and I think the reason was to learn how to have relationships that were meeting, that were like other than conquering and other than being conquered. In Aikido, you dance, you play, you embrace, you join with each other. And I've done a couple of kinds of healing, and the therapy that I do as a psychotherapist is also, that's always, it's like but we have to keep reinforcing that aspect of ourselves, because around us, not so many people support that. So I like not knowing. I do think, I mean, that thing that you talked about in sports is like to pit your strength against someone else in the hopes of winning. I don't think that's actually the same thing as the thing that makes war, but it's related to it, and doing that might satisfy it. I don't know, but I know there can be a joyfulness in competition that I hear from people who enjoy competing. The two people that come to mind were business people. But it's like, yeah, there's nothing to throw away at all.
Yeah, I think I really relate to what you're saying, and I think I've experienced joy in conquest for sure. I think there's something really primal about it, and I think there is a difference between conquest that is just the energy of conquest and conquest which is making someone else less than or overpowering someone. I think they're two very different things. If I think about, well, two things, but they're linked obviously. But if I think about a time when I've experienced the energy of conquest in its essence and I've really enjoyed it, or if I've experienced conquest at the behest of someone else and I've not enjoyed it, it instantly dismantles me. You know, if I see someone else's like less than it, there's no joy in that. So there is different levels, isn't there? And I hadn't thought about that before. So I'm really glad that's come up. Thank you for enlightening that. Kathy, did you want to add something else?
I did. I'm not sure if it's going off on a detour or if it is worth saying, but it was picking up on a point in the middle of what Sandra was saying. When and if my role is to support mainstream people in relating all that we're talking about here to our everyday lives, I'm very conscious of how prevalent the conversation is, that there are people who are responsible for getting the world in the mess that it's in, and generally we're blaming either the politicians or some invisible forces that are perceived to be controlling the world economy and manipulating our psychology. And one of the things that seems to me so much more realistic and human response to that is to understand that these qualities are in all of us. If we villainize some people, if we say those people are our problem, then we can't solve the thing. We absolutely create ourselves as a victim of a system at that point. And that's actually a get-out clause for us. That's actually a comfortable story to sit in, because then we have no obligation to act. If we engage in a story that there are people who have bad qualities and they are running the system and we can't counter their control, then we can just carry on our lives in comfort and not have to meet the challenge. So I think there's a lot of value in dismantling that part of a very common narrative. It's a very common narrative that there are politicians and people controlling the world with ill intent. And if instead we do what Sandra has demonstrated very well, own these qualities within ourselves, then we have a point of power. Then we can say, okay, it's what am I bringing to the collective that is perpetuating this conversation, these behaviors within our culture? And I feel it's then a collective movement, and at some point we'll reach a tipping point where it's normal in culture to behave harmoniously rather than conquestly. And what I would wish for people listening to this conversation is that, yeah, obviously we've talked about the value of inquiring for ourselves into where we are conquesty, and I'm reiterating the point here. Don't imagine that it's some bad people and we need to get rid of them and then we're gonna have an easier world. But the work to be done is within ourselves. That's the only point of power that we have. That's the only way we can impact the whole dynamic of culture.
Thanks, Kathy.
That was brilliant.
That was really brilliant. And I think actually it's a really nice point to finish on, because we are already out of time, unfortunately.
Really?
Yeah.
And I was wondering, that was my kind of ending question that was in my mind, was what would we leave people with to, if we're sort of, you know, inviting people to sort of explore this for the next 4 weeks and then sort of rejoin us in another conversation to kind of look at more of the how to meet this in ourselves. You know, what would we leave people with? So actually what you just said was really nice, because it really spoke to that. I just wonder, Sandra and Shodo, is there anything just very quickly you'd like to add as a kind of a seed thought to go away with for the next 4 weeks to explore this, for people to explore this in themselves?
I would give a related story, so I won't.
Okay, it's going to take a bit.
It's like, okay, we cannot be the victims.
Yes. Okay, yeah, absolutely. Sandra, do you want to add anything quick just to sort of leave people with?
Yeah, thank you. So there's 2 things. One is I think it's really important to, because we are nature, and because these things are as difficult as, you know, after I talked about my theory, Shodo quite rightly talked about, well, how do you do that in practice, because of, you know, the system and trauma and brain and body, and, you know, absolutely that's part of why things have taken me so long. But so there's something for me about how do we create the conditions. You know, if we look to the natural world as our teacher, you know, the other species of life of which we're part, actually everything thrives in a set of conditions. And so there's something to think about, what are the set of conditions that bring out the best in me? And then the other little thing, just because I'm making an assumption, so it would be amazing if I'm wrong, but I think the most difficult thing about what I bring is this proposition of innocence. And so if we're inviting people to think about this over the next 4 weeks, I'd put the 2 things together. What are the conditions that I need in which to thrive and be my best and be my most expanded and be my most loving and strong and compassionate? And also, how do I see myself as innocent? And if I can't see myself as innocent, can I bring some compassionate love into that space and really inquire into my own innocence? That's what I would offer.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you. I think we'll finish there. That feels like a really nice offering to finish with. So thank you for those last little bits. Just to mention, we had a comment from someone who said sport is competitive and is also about conquest, but it's also about cooperation and teamwork. It has been the power to bring people together. It has the power, sorry, to bring people together. For example, girl football teams in the developing world have been a brilliant way to promote girls' rights. So yeah, I think it's exactly what we're talking to, isn't it? There's a dualistic element to conquest, and it's not all bad. Nothing. I don't believe it's all bad. So yeah, so thank you for that comment, David. Great. So I think we'll leave it there, ladies. So just to reiterate what I said at the beginning, next week we're going to be having a conversation on trauma recovery. So I'm going to be joined by 2 of my dear friends and colleagues who are also mindfulness-based psychotherapists, who also have a passion for understanding and working with trauma. And we're going to do some practical, might be a bit practical, I think. We're going to offer some tools and techniques to help with self-regulation, eco-regulation, which is a term I've come up with, where we find regulation in nature, and we're just going to be exploring how to settle our nervous systems enough that we can access the innate response of resilience and adaptability. And I hope it will be a nice follow-on from this conversation today. And we will be back with these lovely ladies. Sandra, Catherine, and SHODO have agreed to come and do a second part 2 of this conversation to dive a bit deeper into how we work with this in ourselves in 4 weeks. That will be on Tuesday, the 4th of May. Thank you very much, ladies. Very grateful for the conversation. It's given me more and more to, yeah, it's enlightened a lot for me, and I hope it has for people listening. I look forward to the second part of this conversation and wishing you all well. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine.
And delightful.
And thank you, Kathy and SHODO. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care, ladies. Bye-bye.
Community resilience in changing times.